Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we get things started, I would just like to, in the spirit of reconciliation, Wargaming Sydney and the Sydney Game Developers acknowledges the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. Thank you all very much for coming tonight. I can see a few people chatting away. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Let me know if there's any problems with the sound. I can see that we have Nick, we've got Otto, Bilal's here. I can't believe you've come along to watch your own interview, Bilal. How narcissistic. We've got Ivan and Alex. I don't know whether you're still around or not, but yep, the stream will be here later for you to watch as a video on demand once we finish. So a little bit different tonight. Normally we do have a live presenter and they'll be presenting on a particular subject, but I couldn't resist taking the opportunity to play this interview for you. So the UNSW Computer Science and Engineering Society, recently they interviewed Bilal about a couple of different subjects, about what his uni experience was like, what it was like for his first couple of roles, getting into the gaming industry. And as you're about to see, it's a really interesting interview. Bilal, like a lot of people, he didn't go from uni straight to game development. He had a whole other career first. We'll be able to hear all about that in a second. Before we do get on to that, I just want to say this is something new that we're doing tonight. If you do enjoy it, please give it a like so that I know that you enjoyed it. And if you want to, why not subscribe to the channel as well? There's this whole YouTube algorithm thing and it helps us and they boost the video and then more people watch it and more people join and we're able to get more talks out to you. So without further ado, I think it's time to go over to Bilal and let's watch his interview.
I used to play a game when I was really little called Total Annihilation. Wargaming bought that, which is cool. When I found that out, I was like, whoa, that's awesome.
So welcome everyone to the new episode of the Echo Podcast. I'm Rani from the CSESoc Careers team, here with Nat from the CSESoc Media team, and we're joined by the amazing Bilal Akil, a senior software engineer at Wargaming, who's had quite an interesting career journey. Bilal, would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. I'm not sure I'd introduce myself as amazing, but thank you. I'm now a game developer at Wargaming, and I also make some indie games outside of Wargaming. Other than that, I'm a father, my son's almost turning 2, so that's keeping me very busy. And I play a lot of games and I program stuff on the side as well. So much of my life is on computers and much of that is about games.
How are you finding in general lockdown?
Not too bad. I'm fortunate to be in an industry that isn't very negatively impacted by COVID. In fact, people look for games when they're stuck at home. So it's a good industry to be in for sure. There are some, the typical loneliness factor. Meeting with some of my best friends was one of the ways I would normally recharge, and I can't really do that as conveniently anymore, and that gets me down sometimes. Other than that, it's kind of weird for my son. He's not even 2, so COVID's almost all he's known for his whole life, which is kind of odd. And you want to be taking little kids to parks and taking them out. It's like if you keep a little puppy at home, it's just got too much energy. So that's a bit odd. But otherwise, yeah, it's fine. I've spent a lot more on Uber Eats than I ever have, but I guess they're having good business at the moment, just like we are in the game industry.
You're talking about the game industry. Do you think that lockdown has influenced your interests and possibly your career as well?
I think I got into it just before that, before the lockdown, and I'd say it's definitely made me feel like it's a very safe choice. So it's like, okay, this is good. I should probably stay here. Maybe I shouldn't think about starting a restaurant or some crazy thing, which would feel a lot more risky. But not too much other than that, I'd say.
Was there anything from when you were younger that drew you to the game industry, or was it more recently?
It's kind of weird. I used to make games when I was pretty young, at high school. And even before that, I used to, on paper, like pretend making kind of Super Mario style platformers, just drawing it with my brother. And yeah, so I was in a kind of game making mood when I was pretty young. But then as I approached uni, I'm not sure why, it just slipped my mind that that's something I could do professionally. And I just went as a full-on programmer, computer science path, and just doing corporate stuff for a few years, just completely forgetting about game dev, kind of, until I guess it's three and a half years ago now. I was kind of feeling, this corporate programming is kind of not great. I'm kind of flipping digital hamburgers, so to speak, for other people's business. And it's not the most motivating thing. So hang on a sec, I used to love making games. Why did I just drop that? And that's when I started trying to get back into it.
That's really cool how your interests have come in a full circle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think we have some questions touching on that later on, but I wanted to touch on the first part of that. So about your uni experience, like I know a lot of CSESoc students will be students, so like I guess want to talk a bit more about how your uni experience was. So I guess firstly, what made you choose the degrees that you did? Were you sort of like still like had some interest in gaming before choosing your degrees, or did you sort of choose your degrees and like they informed later on that you'd be interested in gaming?
Yeah, so when I was about to finish high school, I was just kind of starting to really fall in love with programming in general. I started programming add-ons for World of Warcraft, and that's when I started opening my eyes like, oh my God, programming is so cool. And I was making websites, and just code was like, oh, this is so powerful. So when I was deciding what to do at uni, I mentioned how for some reason I forgot about games. So I was just thinking about programming. Like I want to do as much programming. I want to become the best programmer I can. And computer science seemed like the right choice there. So I was kind of weird. I didn't pick anything except computer science. It was just because like after I graduated, you got that form, like you kind of put your choices in order of preference. And I didn't really put anything, just computer science, which was pretty risky. It worked out. So lucky me in that front.
Wow. Okay. We also took like a sneaky peek at your LinkedIn, and we noticed you've done both an undergraduate degree in computer science and also a master's at UCID. Shake my head, not UNSW. Across computer science and bioinformatics. Can you talk a bit about that? Like, what made you do a bioinformatics master out of everything?
Yeah. The fact that it was bioinformatics was kind of like a side thing. It sounds weird because it's my master's and it's in bioinformatics, but actually what it was research in cloud computing. So I was testing a few different big data software to see how they run at scale and compare them to each other. And to do that comparison, we chose a context, and that context was bioinformatics. And so it was like using some bioinformatics challenges to drive this comparison. So I didn't really know anything about bioinformatics when I went into it. And it's like, okay, this is DNA, it's AGCT. I'm like, wait, what, DNA? So I had to kind of ramp up really quickly on that. But the main focus for me was on the cloud computing side of things.
So that's really interesting. I guess like follow-up question to this undergrad and master's, like how do you find your undergraduate versus master's degree? Would you recommend someone to do a master's degree, perhaps in bioinformatics? And what were the sort of differences you found?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed my undergrad. I found it a very kind of thrilling experience. I mean, there were some classes which I felt were a waste of time. I don't know if uni is still like that, but there were some classes I'm like, I'm doing computer science. Why am I doing this? So putting those ones aside, the actual computer science ones, I really enjoyed, and it was kind of what I hoped for when I went into it, trying to maximize my programming skills. So that was great. And then the reason I ended up coming back and doing masters, there was actually quite a gap in between my bachelor and masters, was when I was starting to get that feeling at work that, yeah, this isn't so great, like that, as I mentioned before, digital hamburger flipping thing. And I thought back to my bachelor and I'm like, that was really good when I did that. I wonder maybe I can go back and do masters and it would be like my bachelor was. Cutting a long story short, it was not like that at all. Maybe because I did a pure research masters, so there was no assignments, none of that stuff. And I realized the reason I enjoyed my bachelor so much, it's kind of gamified in a way. You get a stream of these short duration challenges which really engage you, and then you finish them, you get a good mark hopefully, and that gives you this sense of reward, which is kind of what you want in a game, this loop of challenge reward. But masters, at least a research master, was like, okay, you got 2 years plus, please produce a thesis. And so it was very different. And I struggled with that quite a bit, especially because I was doing part-time, I was still working. And so it dragged on for a very long time, much more than 2 years. And that was pretty hard. So yeah, I guess you really want to think like, do I think I could do that? Like, just if I've just dropped somewhere and it's kind of like a big blank canvas, and a lot of it is guiding yourself to get through it, figure out what you need to do next to take it in the right direction. And it's just such a big period of time to focus on one thing. So yeah, it's a challenge. So I would try to encourage people to picture themselves in that situation. Is that somewhere they think they would thrive or struggle before they make that decision?
Thanks so much for your set on that. But I feel like a lot of people don't quite know what they're getting into, maybe, for masters. So I think that would be really
myself included.
Okay. I guess like end of uni, everyone goes into uni for a degree to hopefully find a job or land a role. Did you feel like your degrees were helpful in getting that role, or what was the most useful part of your degrees?
Yeah, I guess it sounds kind of cynical, but the most useful part of the degree was the degree itself in terms of getting a job. The things that I learned in computer science weren't that useful for the first few jobs I got, like the actual skills, because they were much lower level than the jobs needed. So I learned things like concurrency and algorithms and complexity and these sorts of things, but that pretty much didn't come up at all in my first 5 years of work or something. Actually, It didn't really come up at all until I switched to the game industry. And the things that did come up, which was like making websites, making apps, they didn't teach that in computer science. So it was kind of weird. But having now in wargaming been in a position where I'm looking at resumes and such, definitely having a degree is helpful, because it does speak that you're able to get through such a large commitment like that. And, degrees are difficult in their nature. So it does definitely help with the recruitment process, even if, like I mentioned, you don't have very directly applicable skills from the degree. Just the fact that you could do those, considering how hard they are, is a pretty big sign, a good sign in the hiring process.
Okay, awesome. And you did mention things that you did outside of the degree. Were there any extracurriculars that you did at university? Are there any extracurriculars that you would recommend to students who are at university now?
I don't know what the definition of extracurricular is. I didn't do much with my actual university, like UCID driven activities, but I did do stuff outside that. So I went to like community meetups and did hackathons and these kinds of things. I don't know if that counts as extracurricular.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But yeah, that really helped. I met a lot of people. I learned about their stories and how they got into the industry and some of the challenges. So a lot of secondhand wisdom, I'll call it, from that, just interacting with a wide range of people there. At uni, you mostly interact with uni students, and there's not as broad a range of experience that will be rubbing off on you. But when you go out into the community, at one point I was going to like startup meetups, tech meetups, a few different kinds of meetups, and meeting all different kinds of people and learning more about the world like that. And then hackathons was a way to exercise some of my programming skills and build kind of a portfolio as well. So those were things that both I enjoyed, firstly. Another thing with the meetups is that if you go to a lot of them, that's a lot of free dinners. So it's a good way to save money, perhaps. Maybe not so much during COVID. But yeah, so I enjoyed them, and they also helped me.
So, as previously mentioned, we looked through your LinkedIn and we noticed that you've had a range of jobs in various companies. So, how would you explain the difference in each role?
Yeah, if I think back, there's probably like 4 roles. Or 4 companies, I guess. The first one at a digital agency called Thinkin', that was kind of my first job, just whatever I could do to get into the industry. And that ended up being making websites and eventually making apps. And when I started there, I was the only programmer. They used to outsource, but they were having problems. If there were bugs, it's pretty hard to outsource fixing of bugs. So that was kind of why they hired me initially. But by the end, I think I was there for almost 3 years. There were a couple more programmers, so I kind of naturally moved into a tech lead role, but of all kind of newbies. So it's kind of a relative term. I wasn't like some expert. I was just a newbie leading other newbies. So it was an interesting experience there. And so yeah, that was kind of just let me do whatever I can do and get paid for it, as long as it helps me with my resume. And after that, I moved to Amasim. So that was like, okay, I've got some experience now. I think I want to try something more than a little company that just makes websites and stuff. And this opportunity came along. I think I was pretty picky at the time. It's like I wanted to work part-time because I'm doing my master's, and my wife is, at the time, she wasn't living in Australia. We were waiting for her visa. So like, I want to spend 3 months a year in China. I can work remotely. So I had all these requirements, which kind of limited my availability. So I applied for all kinds of places, and that was one that actually was fine with all my requirements. And yeah, over there, I experienced working in more, what do I call it, structured teams, things like agile development practices and actual practices. You know, at that digital agency, it was kind of just working, do whatever. There's no structure, just get the job done. But over there, that was the first time that I experienced a more it's not serious, I don't know what the word is, just structured environment, and started learning about that side of the world of development. And I was there for a while, and they supported me, which was awesome. And then my next moves were kind of as I changed in my mind what I wanted to do. So I was like, you know what, I'm thinking of starting my own company maybe. And that's when I was going a lot more of the startup meetups and trying to learn more about the business world. And I thought a good way to learn more about that would be to actually work at a startup, so I could learn about the problems that they have, because I'm sure they have very different problems to a big company like Amasim. So that drove the next change in role I had. So I moved to a startup, and initially it wasn't really clear what my role would be, because that's kind of what it's like at startups. It's like, do whatever. We need to get stuff done. Okay, so what should I put on my LinkedIn? And the CEO at the time was like, "Oh, just put CTO." What? Okay. So it's weird, but startups is a very different ballpark, and that totally achieved what I wanted going there. Like it was wild. I remember talking to lawyers, hearing about tax problems and just all kinds of weird problems that happen in the startup world. So it kind of delivered the learning I was looking for. And I was pretty much there until that final switch to the game industry, where I'm now at Wargaming. So yeah, it's like the different roles were tied to, in my mind, the different steps in my career journey. So that's kind of where that came from.
And you talk about the differences between each company and how there's like more structured compared to looking at developing websites and apps. Would you say that working at a new company, you have to start from scratch, or are those skills transferable?
Skills are transferable. Like now that I know about things like Agile, and if I go to another company and they do something vaguely similar, it'll be a lot faster for me ramping up and attaching myself to that. But I've also learned that every company kind of has its own DNA in how they do their things. And what I've learned at Wargaming, sometimes not even the company, it's specific teams. They'll develop their own way of working over time. So an important thing is to be adaptable, so to speak. You want to come in and work with that company, not be rigid and say, "Oh, that's not how you should do things," or this and that. So it helps to have that experience and know how it's been done in other places, and that can help if you know things that worked and didn't work. You can suggest them as improvements. But yeah, end of the day, you need to work with the company.
Having that said, which company would you say was the hardest to adapt to?
It's a tricky one. Wargaming was interesting because it was actually my first role in the game industry, and it's a AAA studio, so there was this pretty big feeling of imposter syndrome, like, oh my god, these guys are all gods around me and I just don't even know what I'm doing here. But I was fortunate to be on a project which actually utilized a lot of my background. The first job was definitely a struggle because I started as the only programmer in my first job, which means no one could guide me or help me in my first job, which is not really a position you want to be in. Normally, if you're new to something, you want to have someone to kind of show you the ropes and help you through things. So I was very much thrown into the deep end with that. So I would consider that the hardest, but maybe that helped me kind of in the future, because you get burned once and you're stronger later. Actually, I'd say that's the case for a lot of things from my first job. I kind of overworked myself the most there. There was overtime. I was underpaid, and just all these things which I learned to look out for in the future jobs. So now I'm really not okay with overtime. I mean, there's situations where it's needed, but it shouldn't be the norm at all. And maybe I wouldn't have, if I wasn't so burned from my first job, I wouldn't have kind of learned that as quickly as I did, and maybe that could have been an ongoing problem. But yeah.
That's really interesting how you learn a lot from the first job and take that on with your rest of your career path. And you mentioned AAA. What's the main differences you would say between indie development and AAA?
Well, I guess the core thing is the scale of the projects. And while that might just sound like, yeah, obviously, AAA is bigger and indie is smaller, the knock-on effects that scale has is pretty profound. So when you have a big enough game, that means there's a lot of teams and a lot of specialties within the teams. And I remember seeing on Wargaming's job board at some point a role that's like vehicle physics engineer, which is just so hyper specialized. And it's like, can you imagine yourself just working on like wheels and bouncing on rock and like just vehicle physics? And then in the indie game, the scale's smaller, which means the team's smaller, often only just one person, which means you are all the teams. So you need to do everything. There's no concept of specialization. And if you contrast in a AAA, you've got one person working on vehicle physics for a game for a couple of years, whereas in indie, you want to release an entire game in a few months as just one person. It's like completely worlds apart, just from the scale being different. The way the game that gets made is completely different as well.
That's really cool.
So for our students who don't know, Wargaming is an award-winning AAA online game developer and publisher with leading games across the free-to-play and remote market, delivering authentic game experiences and services across multiple platforms. So Bilal, as someone who works at Wargaming, is there anything that we've missed in our description just then about Wargaming that you'd like to add?
I just want to add that they're really great as an employer. I know this sounds like I'm being paid to say that, but yeah, I mean, the games they make are great. That's cool. But they really pride themselves in also being a great employer. So I feel like they've, compared to, I don't mean to put my other experiences down, but it definitely feels like a nicer place to work than any I've worked before.
Sure. I think Nat's gonna ask you about your work as a software dev there. So maybe we can ask, like, why do you feel like Wargaming has a lot more care?
Yeah. So one thing I really like about it, and that has made it hard for me to consider other positions in other companies, is how much emphasis they have on individual development. So they allocate a pretty significant amount of time to the employees developing their own skills and kind of creating their own goals and trying to move towards it, even in work time. I've called some other companies and they're like, yeah, we support individual development. We give you a budget, but you need to do it all in your own time, which is normal, and that's still good. But Wargaming kind of goes the extra mile and even provides time, which I find is one of the most important factors. So you actually, I think I'm allowed to say this, we have something called Dice Days, which is like 1.5 days a month, where you can kind of just work on other projects, whatever you like, almost, as long as it contributes to your development goals. So, and your own development goals come up at your annual progress review. So, like, if you're not developing yourself well, that's a problem. So that's kind of an example of how they take you seriously, because that's even part of their progress review.
Wow, that's really interesting. I cannot wait to hear more about that later. Let me jump back on my topic. So, a little bit more about industry of gaming. Would you be happy to describe the AAA gaming industry in Australia and what it's like in general working in AAA?
Sure. It's growing, which is good. We've got some new competition in Melbourne, especially. We've had Sledgehammer games popping up. I think there's been rumors of Ubisoft coming down. I'm not sure where that went, but it's good that more AAA is coming. The government recently added some temptation, I guess, for companies to come down with tax cuts if they make a certain amount of revenue. Unfortunately, that doesn't apply to indies, but it does help AAA. So it looks like a direction that the government is finally realizing this is a big business. So we want to start investing more in it. So that's good. That means that hopefully there will be more and more roles available for the right people. But before that, it was pretty tough, because Wargaming's been here a long time, yes, but I'm not too familiar with many other big AAAs in Australia. So, there's a supply versus demand issue there. where there's a lot of people studying games, but there's not that many AAA studios here. And so I've heard of a lot of people moving overseas for jobs after studying here, which is unfortunate, but hopefully things will get better and better over time.
Okay. That sounds really optimistic, which is good to hear. I guess on the other side of AAA, would you be happy to go give a quick description of like the indie game development industry in Australia, or that you've had experience with?
Yeah. So there's a lot of really nice people in the indie game community here. So we've got a few regular community things. There's a Games with the Wings Discord I'll plug. I'm not part of that, so I'm not paid to say this. But that used to have the regular Beer and Pixels, which everyone misses now that COVID's happening. It's still happening virtually. That's a place, if you're interested, a lot of indie devs meet every month virtually and share their games in progress. And there have been other events pop up here and there. And one thing I always found when I went to them is just how inclusive and awesome the people who were there were. And it's just everyone was so supportive of each other. And there's really also such a wide range of indie games being created. Like it's more art for a lot of people, and like expression of how they feel and things like that. So you get a whole, it's very kind of inspirational. Like you see all different kinds of games and they can help you come up with ideas for your own. And you see things you never thought, like, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen a game like that. So it's good. There's a lot of talent and there's a lot of support. So it's a great community here, I think.
Awesome. So with indie games, we also saw that you're the founder of Doodad Games. What was your inspiration behind that? Why did you create and how are you balancing it with your personal life and your work life?
So I started Doodad Games at that kind of point where I realized, hey, I used to love games before. Why did I stop? You know what? I'm going to get back into it. And so it was this position where I finally finished my master's and I had a decent amount of savings. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to make a game. Despite having no recent game development experience. And so I quit my job and I blew my savings and I didn't end up with a finished game, but I had Doodad Games. So then I went back to work and later joined Wargaming, but I kept making games with Doodad Games on the side. And it's been a struggle to balance that, especially since my son was born almost 2 years ago. It's become very much a struggle. But I've managed to, I'm trying to use my time at Wargaming to kind of help stack the cards in my favor with Doodad Games. So for instance, I've been able to arrange a 4-day work week with Wargaming. And so I have 1 day a week just dedicated to Doodad Games at least. And although I can try to put some extra work at night, say, well, everyone's asleep, usually between 10 and 12 p.m., I don't put pressure on myself for that. Like if I can, awesome. But life, COVID, don't stress out. If you just want to play Path of Exile, just go ahead. Don't give yourself crap for that kind of stuff. And that's been a lot better now that I do have that 1 day that I can rely on, because that means even if I don't get anything in at night, I have a kind of secure slot. Like I will get some work done this week at least. So yeah, I don't know if that really touched on the inspiration, but yeah, it's kind of, I wanted to make games when I was little and then I forgot about it. And then I wasn't satisfied with my corporate programming life. I'm like, hang on, I can make games. And so Doodad Games was born.
Awesome. Yeah, I also wanted to ask, like you mentioned that you're playing Path of Exile in your free time. Has being in wargaming and the game industry influenced how much time you spend playing games? Like you find yourself playing games more and being like, wow, whoever worked on the vehicle tracking system in this game did a good job. or do you find yourself playing games less and like doing other stuff? How's that impacted you?
So I'd say for reasons other than wargaming, I'm playing games much less than I ever have. I used to play heaps and heaps of games when I was going through school and uni, but then I got a girlfriend and a wife and that kind of stuff, and now son and work. So those are the reasons I play less games. I would love to play games as much as I used to, but that's not practical anymore, unfortunately. Working in the industry and at wargaming has made me look at games differently. I have a much more tangible understanding of the struggles behind them. And so I might look at a game and there's something like, I don't know, a person's cape is blowing in the wind, which is like, normally you would hardly like not think about it much. And I'll be like, oh, those physics are so good. How do they optimize it? So I'm looking at the games that I play differently. So that's about it, I'd say. Sometimes I play games for work. We have regular play tests at the office, but not that much. So not enough to cover the loss from the rest of my life.
Out of curiosity, what would you say is your favorite game that wargaming has produced?
I used to play a game when I was really little called Total Annihilation. Wargaming bought that, which is cool. When I found that out, I was like, whoa, that's awesome. But I don't think they produced it, so maybe that doesn't count. Other than putting that aside, I hadn't actually played any of Wargaming's games before I started out Wargaming. So as I got the interview, I'm like, oh man, I better play them. So I downloaded the 3 big ones, World of Tanks, World of Warships, and World of Planes, and gave them a go. And between the 3, World of Warships was my favorite. It was pretty cool seeing a battle at such a large scale. And I tried another one that they released around the time I started called Pagan Online, which was an action RPG, kind of like Diablo. And that was cool. I do like that genre more. I don't play many shooting games, so the flagship the flagship wargaming games aren't that much my style, but Pagan Online was more. So yeah, I don't know. Hard to answer specifically because they're not games I regularly play.
Still really interesting. How would you describe the company culture at wargaming?
It's a good one. So I'm speaking for Wargaming Sydney here. I mean, the global company's made of many individual studios. I can only speak on behalf of Wargaming Sydney, but it's really, really good. We try to always improve things. We've got these community groups that have like weekly meetings, and some of the topics are like diversity and environmental stuff. So back when we were in the office, the environmental group would meet and try to find ways to improve things. And so they were actually able to, for instance, change all the light bulbs because that was the thing. One of the groups said that we could use these light bulbs, they'll reduce the energy bill. And we can switch this energy company, they have 100% green. And so they're actually like doing things, which is cool. And a more recent example that there was kind of some drama with stuff happening at Blizzard recently. I won't go too much into the detail, but it made the company stop and reflect like, hang on, is there any toxic behavior going on here? Let's have a meeting and try to introspect into the company, see any problems and opportunities for improvement. So they're actually kind of looking in on themselves and trying to keep improving, which is really good.
Really interesting how you how wargaming looks at reflecting on themselves and how they can improve. Would you say how would you describe the teams inside wargaming? Are there specific game engine teams, graphic, or teams cross-functional? Do you collaborate often? In general.
Yeah. So the studio is big enough and has a wide enough range of projects that you kind of get a bit of everything. So And this is even just within Wargaming Sydney. I know the wider Wargaming will have all kinds of stuff, but even just within Wargaming Sydney, we've got enough of a range of projects that you will have some cross-functional teams. I'm on a cross-functional team. We're on a pretty new project, so we've got everyone we need on our team. We've got a designer, product manager, engineers, just testers, just the whole thing on our team. And then for other much larger projects, it might be split into many more teams. And even then, some of the teams might be cross-functional. Like if they're working on adding complete like gameplay content, then they're responsible for doing the art, adding the characters, adding the gameplay mechanics, and doing all those things. But then there'll also be more of those hyper-focused teams. Like this is the networking team, this is the graphics team, this is the replays team. So you get a mix of it all there, which is good. It means that if you want to change things up, so maybe I want to try specializing in something, I can just speak to my manager. It's like, hey, I'm interested in switching over to this team, and then he can work with me on making that happen. So it's good to have that opportunity. Firstly, that variety, and then the opportunity to kind of inject yourself among it if there's a specific thing you want to try.
Yeah, it's really cool how collaboration works at Wargaming, and you can choose to specialize or talk to the manager to have an opportunity to work in different areas. How do tasks get completed at Wargaming? As in, how often do you have meetings and how do you plan out the week?
Yeah, so that's a thing that I think it'll be a team per team thing. So we don't really have like a company mandated process. It's more like every team will kind of develop their own way of working, and as the team members change, maybe different things will work for them. The team size is another factor there. So I can speak on behalf of my team at least, and for that we've got sprints. So this is in a kind of agile setup. We've got a sprint, which is a period of time, 2 or 3 weeks, for example, and that's like a regular thing. We want to be able to complete a chunk of work by then. So before the sprint, you've got a process of saying, okay, what work is available? What priority is it in? What's the most important to do? And so what do we want to try to get done in that sprint? So when the sprint starts, there's a bunch of work there. People know about the work, firstly, that there's something called a refinement process, which happens before the sprint. And that's so everyone learns what they need to about it, and there's context on it so that they can actually start working. And then you try to smash it out during the sprint. We've got things like code review, so you don't have one person write code and just chuck it into production. So we've got things like that, and hopefully get it done before the end of the sprint. And yeah, it's just a kind of repeating cycle like that. At the end of each sprint, you'll have a retro where you look back on the sprint, what went well, what didn't go well, anything we should change moving forward. Yeah, a lot of these are kind of agile Scrum things. I don't know if they teach those at uni. They didn't teach me. I learned them at AMASIM, I think. So yeah, there's some structure to it. And there are quite a few meetings, at least on my team. It might depend on the team. My team is working on like a completely new thing where there's no like example we can reference from. And so we have a lot of meetings because we have to kind of solve a lot of problems collaboratively. But maybe, I don't know if other teams, it's not that much new stuff and you can just like get work done without having to meet. I'm not sure.
When you talk about sprints, is there a particular time of the year where wargaming is most busy, or is it usually a cycle and it just keeps continuing?
So I'm coming up on 2 years there. I can't remember any particular like seasonal or just time-based crunch, but there is always a bit of pressure if a big product is about to release, or if like there's a specific delivery milestone that's about to happen. But that usually won't affect the whole company. It will just affect the people working in those relevant teams. So that's always a thing, but you know, it's not nearly as bad as I've heard. So before I came into the game industry, I heard a lot of kind of horror stories, and cyberpunk crunch for like a couple of years. I don't know. So it wasn't nearly that bad. It was just like, okay, everyone work hard, but you still have your managers telling you, please don't work on the weekends. Please, like, that's not okay. We had our CEO at one point have this meeting with the whole company. It's like, guys, please don't work overtime. It's not worth it. So it's like people are more serious and like less chatty and stuff, but it's not like crunch burnout. So
What would you say is the biggest challenge, either technological or just socially, in your job as a game developer?
So I mentioned I'm on a fresh new project, so that has all kinds of technological challenges. And I can't really mention too much about my project, naturally, but it's one that kind of touches a lot of different things. And for that, it needs to use a lot of different technologies. And that's been really challenging, especially as our team is growing and there's also a growing number of technologies we use. That means there's so much that everyone needs to learn, and it's kind of becoming hard to manage. So you start to have the thought, like, should we split into multiple teams where they each need to know less things, but that will have side effects? And so I've found that to be quite an interesting challenge with not really an obvious way of how to move forward. That would be very different to, say, the challenges a hyper specialized team would have, because they're more about getting really deep into a single technology, whereas my team is using all kinds of things. So,
what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
Well, I think this goes for almost all things programming, and that's kind of what made me fall in love with coding in the first place. But there's this special feeling of satisfaction when a thing works and you use it and it does what you wanted it to do. It's like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then in the game industry, that thing is a game. And, as a gamer, I'm playing my own game. I'm like, oh my God, it's so cool. So that's awesome. And recently, now I've got my son, I'm working on a game for my son, and watching him play my game was like, oh, this is insane. So, yeah.
That's so cool how you can share what you're creating with your son. What do you think are important qualities to have in order to be a game developer?
So definitely problem solving. Game development is very different to the burger flipping kind of thing that I experienced in my other jobs. It wasn't just make a website, okay, make another website, okay, make an app. Games just have a way of always challenging you, whether it's through performance, this thing is running too slow, and then you're like, okay, how can I make it faster? I don't even know how. So before you can solve it, you need to take a step back, like, okay, what's the problem? How do I solve this? So problem solving is definitely a big thing. I've also found that I can't just Google solutions as much as I used to. So in web dev, that was definitely a thing. Like almost everything you needed was on Stack Overflow. You had to learn how to be good at searching things. But I've found in games that's not so much the case, because every game has its own way of working. Like, sure, we all use Unity or Unreal, but we have our own like tile system or grid system, and no one else knows what that is. So how can they answer your question? So it's a lot more internal problem solving. It's a lot harder to ask for help if you're facing those levels of problems. Wargaming, when you're working at a big company like Wargaming and you're surrounded by geniuses, you will be able to collaborate and find solutions. But if you're working indie, you won't. And so you'll have to solve all those problems yourself, which can be quite difficult.
I guess a lot of students would definitely be interested in hearing what should they do, what are the important things they should do to actually make it into the gaming industry or into AAA gaming. I guess, like, what is the recruitment process at Wargaming like? What did you go through?
Cool. So it's a multi-stage interview process. I don't think they did anything really unique or out of the normal. So it's probably similar to a lot of other companies. Start with a phone interview and then proceed to I would say in person, but that's kind of meaningless now. A FaceTime Zoom interview, I guess, and you're usually interviewing different people at different stages. So the first time would be a recruiter, and they kind of make sure you're not a lunatic or something before passing you on to the manager, and he would see if you seem to have relevant experience for the role, and if it would be good to. I think when I did it, we did a programming test in the interview room. I don't know how that would work now, if they'll send you a little challenge, or I think that's what it was actually. They'll send you a little programming challenge just to see that you actually can program. You're not, because you'd be surprised, some people apply for jobs and they actually don't know how to program. I don't know what they're thinking. So there's kind of a couple of sanity checks along the way. And then you'll have another meeting, another chat with some more of the someone at the director level, so you can learn more about the kind of higher level strategy for the company and see how that works with you, and that they can learn about you. So there's a few rounds of interviews before that happens. And if everything goes well, then you'll have a computer sent to your house and start meeting all the team and stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's so cool. And I was gonna ask if Wargaming or gaming does anything special in terms of interviews, but it sounds like you guys don't really. Like even in, for example, the programming interview, would that be like a specific challenge related to a game, or would it just be like a normal find the max element in some complex data structure?
I don't recall doing any game specific ones. And depending on the level of seniority that you apply for, a lot of the time, like I remember when I was looking at, say, some junior applications, it wasn't really so much did they get the answer perfect or not. It was more just to see like what is their process of thinking, because we recognize, especially at those lower levels, that there's going to be a lot of growth on the job. So it's not so much that you know everything before you come into it, but at least that you have we can hopefully see that there's a mindset of problem solving and this and that.
Okay. I guess if you were an applicant, how would you suggest is the best way to show that you have that mindset of problem solving? Are there particular signals that you guys look out for?
Yeah, well, the big standout for me is if you solve problems and you can show us that you have. So it might be a kind of thing where you have to have the privilege of time and whatnot. But if you've done game jams or if you've done hackathons and you've got a portfolio of a couple of things you've created, then it's like, okay, this person's actually done that. So that's a very good way of showing that you can do that, by showing that you did do that. So that's definitely something that can help if you are able to do it. It's probably the biggest winner. Okay,
awesome. And other things are like, we hear a lot that soft skills are important. How do you think that's taken into consideration versus technical skills throughout the process?
Yeah, so soft skills are pretty big, showing that you're a good communicator, that you're a good listener. I mentioned, like in my project, we've got quite a lot of meetings where we have to collaborate on things. And if that's something that we feel like an applicant will struggle to be a part of, if they have trouble listening or contributing to these discussions, then that's going to be an issue, because those discussions are part of the job. So, how do I answer the question? Soft skills are important. How can you demonstrate them? Was that the question?
Yeah, kind of. Like how would I, as an applicant, how can I demonstrate I have those soft skills? Is it just through the talking in the interview? There's no real answer to this one.
Yeah, I guess that's something it's kind of hard, because, part of the name is soft skill is that something that isn't just immediately visible, like a technical skill. So I think that's part of the reason that there are so many stages to the interview process and different people involved. So each of these people are communicating with you, and they'll kind of they'll respond with how they feel you are as a communicator and that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure I can think of any specific recommendations, because it's a very how does it feel kind of thing.
So, just like general advice, what do you wish you'd known when starting out your career path?
I wish I'd thought of games before wasting a few years and then realizing, hang on, I loved games. So that's one thing. I don't know. I feel like I was pretty fortunate because at least I knew I liked programming, and that was able to help me a lot. Knowing that you do like something and being able to go down a path which has something you like is very beneficial. But not everyone has that luxury. I know my brother, for instance, he was never able to find that thing he wanted to do, and that is a lot harder to work with if you're not sure what you want to do. So what do I wish I'd have known? I definitely got underpaid in my first few jobs. I wish I knew more what I deserved for the work that I was doing. So it's easy to kind of undercut yourself because you think, this is my first job, I just need to get whatever I can. But I had an interesting comparison with a friend of mine. We graduated at the same time, and our kind of salaries went very different because of how I kind of undercut myself initially, and that lowered my expectations for future jobs. Whereas he kind of studied the industry more first and saw, okay, this is what someone with my experience should get paid, and actually fight for that more. So yeah, I guess be careful not to undercut yourself. Do your research and see what you deserve, and hopefully if you're a programmer, for instance, there should be lots of jobs to apply for, and shouldn't just take whatever you can get necessarily. Especially if it's low, that could be a sign that there's other problems, as was the case with my first job, underpay and overtime. So just be careful for those kinds of things.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and all this advice and how you've navigated your career.
Thank you for listening and asking all these awesome questions.
Amazing. So to wrap up, hi everyone. To those listening, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Echo. And if you enjoyed this episode, we also hope to see you in the next podcast. Thank you once again to Bilal and Natalie for joining us as well. And Bilal taking time out of what must be a really busy day, doing all these cool things between AAA and indie game development and being a dad, to come talk with us.
Hopefully you can hear me now. That usually only happens in my Zoom meetings. I can't believe I did that. No. I'm gonna wait. Yay, we can hear you. So yeah, as I was gonna say, I did see that there's a few more questions for Bilal, so I'm just gonna rabbit on for a little bit. I've got a couple of things I want to talk to you all about. And you can have a chance to answer those. So the first thing I want to say is just a huge thank you to UNSW Computer Science and Engineering Society again. That the interview that you just watched, it only went live on their channel today. So I thought there was no way they were going to let us sort of steal their thunder and do it on the same day. So I have put a link to their YouTube channel in the description below. So if you enjoyed this interview, they've got a hell of a lot more over there. Might be worth going over, having a look, maybe give them a little subscribe as well. Tell them what Wargaming Sydney sent you, and that way they'll like us. The other thing I wanted to do is thank Bilal. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and he's been all over it, answering everyone's questions as they've come through, without being too mushy about it. Bilal's a fantastic guy, and you can see that from how generous he's been with his time tonight. If you, one of the things you would have heard him say a lot is that if you have game examples to show, it can really help with applications. One of the ways that I know Bilal does this is, and has done this in the past, and you would have heard him mention, is game jams. And now we do actually have a talk from Bilal about game jams, talking about how you can get the best out of it, the good ways of approaching it. So I'm going to drop the link for that into the chat. So if you haven't seen that, give that a watch. There's a lot of really, really good stuff in there, especially for people who are maybe new to the industry and you are looking for that portfolio piece that's really going to impress someone. The other thing I wanted to say is, if you did enjoy this, you may or may not know that GCAP is starting next week. So GCAP starts on Monday. Excuse me. And there's a whole bunch of fantastic talks happening, but there happens to be a few from the Wargaming crew. And of course, they're the ones that I'm going to tell you about. So on Monday, Lee Harris and Ali McLean. Lee currently works for Wargaming. Ali used to work for Wargaming. She's with Mighty Kingdom now. They're going to be doing a talk. It's sort of split into two. Each of them have a little bit they're going to talk about. Lee's going to be talking about a framework that he uses to help define abstractions. And Ali is going to be doing a risk roadmap that can be used in any game development. Then on the same day, on Monday again, our art director, Dean Finnegan, is going to be doing a talk on art direction. And he is going to be discussing the process and function of delivering a high-level visual design art direction for any project. Then again on Monday, there's so many talks on Monday from Wargaming. Emotional intelligent leadership in a pandemic. So that's one from one of our team, Aidan, and he's going to be talking about how Wargaming Sydney used our people first mantra to not just survive the pandemic, because it's been a thing, but also thrive. Our studio, excuse me, it's gone up and down during the time, but overall we've increased the amount of people that work for the studio today. Then on Tuesday, Luke Ledvich, who's one of our guys, is going to be doing a talk called Polish in Prototyping. Together, we're going to dive into techniques for determining what is important to the experiment, cost-effective ways to add polish to a prototype, and concrete examples of success and failure when polishing features. His talk's also going to come with lots of examples. Luke's had a hell of a career. Before Wargaming Sydney, he worked for Bungie, worked on Halo, worked on Destiny. So he might not be able to show some stuff from those games, but when it comes to talking about this subject, he definitely knows what he's talking about. Just have a quick look at the chat. Bilal one, he's keeping busy. So yeah, with GCAP, if you don't have a ticket yet, the full price for the tickets is $69, I think. But Big Ant have very, very graciously come along, and they've got what is called the Big Hug, where you can get tickets for as low as $2, depending on your personal circumstances. So if you're interested in that, head over to gcap.com.au, click on the tickets. It'll take you through to Eventbrite, and you'll be able to see, what the various ticket prices are. And there's codes which they have at the GCAP site that you can use, to get those reduced rates for the tickets. Really, really worthwhile. Especially if you're at the start of your career in gaming, or you're looking to get into a career in gaming, definitely head over there and see what they've got and have a look at the schedule as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a link for the Games with Wings Discord. If you want to continue the conversation, we can head over there. Hopefully Bilal will be able to head over with us. So yeah, head over to the Games with Wings Discord, where you'll be able to talk to Bilal. You'll be able to hear his voice. And we'll be able to get answers to any other questions that you have. As I said earlier, this was something new for us. We've never done this type of presentation before. So if you enjoyed it, please give it a like so that I know you enjoyed it. And if you fancy subscribing to the channel, I'm not going to say no. Helps with the YouTube algorithm. And yeah, we will see you over on the Discord in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, everyone. It has been fun.